Hello, I'm Jessica Doty. I'm glad to have you here with me to learn some writing techniques that I use in my classrooms. So I'm calling this training Teaching Essay Writing Through Creative and Innovative Thinking. I think that we all have experienced feeling like you want to teach critical thinking and you struggle with the students taking over the struggle of thinking and creating something that's not just regurgitated by each other, by the teacher, and by everything online. So this is my answer to that. So I've been a classroom teacher for about 15 years. I have taught regular education classes all through high school, DE, that's dual enrollment for the college classes, and ESL, and I've taught at alternative schools. And I've used versions of everything I'm teaching here in all my classes. So I have a master's in education, professional and technical writing at NAU. I also have a master's in TESOL at Alliant University in Poway in San Diego. I am from San Diego. I've been there. That's where I got my teaching credential, and I have been in Arizona for the past 5 years. I have two daughters and a stepdaughter, and you can see them right in the middle of all of us there. Next to me is my husband, and on the other side of my daughters is my brother. Uh, we're all at the National Mall in DC. So today, how we will spend our time is I will show you the challenges of teaching writing, which I'm sure you already know. The processes that I repeat, why it works. This is the note prompt essay process. I'll give you some instruction and practice and some tips. So, there's a big problem with teachers assigning versus teaching writing. We can assign writing, but a lot of times you'll have the high achievers get going with it, and then those other students who struggle, they just collapse in defeat. What we're trying to do is teach them writing processes. So I am go. The other problem that I have found is that students can really respond to an essay prompt, but when asked to write without a prompt, they don't know what to do. They also depend on other people's interpretation, the teachers, online sources, or AI. Um, some students regurgitate knowledge that they've heard as opposed to having individual critical thinking skills. Sometimes they have a fear of saying something wrong in their interpretation as opposed to having freedom to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. And then, of course, we all hear the same complaints. Where will I ever use this? Especially while referring to literary analysis and critique. So in this case, I am focusing on literary analysis. However, I will show you later on how you can use this with any type of writing response. So what we will do, I'm going to show you how to simplify your lesson so that you can repeat strategies while still teaching reading and writing skills, critical thinking, all while giving students the ability to be innovative in their analysis and responses. So one of the goals for me here is to not add to your list of massive amount of grading and things to do. The lessons that I'm teaching you here are something that I repeat over and over again, almost 5 or 6 times per school year. And we have a very simple process of reading, pulling quotes, responding to the quotes, building out a claim or analysis, and writing an essay. So unfortunately, I do grade a lot more essays per year, but I grade less uh, of other things. So I do spot checks on outlines and quotes, but I don't spend a whole lot of time on them. That means that they have a lot of time to write, think, discuss, and respond to the content that I'm presenting to them. And I'm going to show you I prefer this. I prefer this over students doing worksheets or multiple choice tests because this is really building their critical thinking skills. Again, I do the little bit of grading on a day-to-day basis so that I have endurance to grade the papers. This no prompt essay, I'm going to explain what that is. So it's not that I'm not giving them any questions, it's that they're using these lenses in order to build their own prompt and build their own thesis statement or claim that's unique to them. They do, again, you'll see that I have given quite a few questions, but there's no prompt like analyze Huck's relationship with Tom and how it guides the theme of the story. So there's no questions like that because what I have found is that those types of questions make students believe that there's only one answer or one a part of the story that's important, as opposed to being able to read something with their own unique perspective and analyze for their own purposes. And that means that I take a lot of the responsibility off my shoulders to teach them what to think. And I ask them to learn how to think about the text as opposed to what I believe about it. So students gather these unique quotes as they write, they review their quotes, and they make a claim about the unique quotes that they chose. And that is really vital, is that ideally everybody in the classroom has a different group of quotes and they have a different lens that we're going to discuss. And that means that all their claims or thesis statements are different. And that's the goal for my classroom. So when students read a lens or read through a lens, these are the four I focus on. I do not do more than this because I feel like it just gets convoluted, difficult, and I feel like most stories, most content can fall under one of these four lenses: human behavior, morals or religion, culture, and history. And so initially I just asked them, hey, looking at the list of these four, what seems the most interesting? And almost always it starts to change as we dive into the details of what this might look like. So this the process is this. This is the process they're going to go through. They're going to read and pull quotes, anything that they find interesting or is related to the lens, or that they just might think might be important. It's okay if it's not exactly perfect because they're going to have some choices to make later on where they get rid of some of the quotes that aren't useful. Then they review the quotes that they found, and then they use those quotes and analysis to write their thesis statement. So during that quote analysis, they ex they look at the grouping of what's being said and see if a claim is being revealed, something, a truth about life, similar to, the way that you've taught themes or thesis statements before, I'm sure. Within the quote analysis part, you have your thesis statement or possible thesis statement, and then you explain how these quotes prove the thesis statement. So this becomes our outline. Their outline is simply this: a thesis statement, the quotes, and explanation on how the quotes prove the thesis. Depending on my level of students, I ask them to add counter arguments or rebuttals. I ask them to build out a deeper analysis. I ask them to discuss variables and elements that may change the outcome. And again, I'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then we formalize it. We fill out the introduction paragraph, topic sentence lead-ins, and then conclusions and revise everything together. So this is the process that I repeat over and over again in every single year. Through this process, I can get students to write a series of one-page response paragraph or response papers. I can get them to write 3-page uh, literary analysis papers, or a combination of all of them. So I may have first semester them write 3 1-page responses using this structure, and then they choose one to build out to a longer uh, essay. So, why this works? It promotes independent thinking and analysis. It teaches reading and writing strategies through the repetition of process. I would encourage you not to do this once, but to have this as a repetitious activity and process that they go through, because this, out of all the things that we do in English class, can be repeated outside of our classroom, in college or their career. It can prepare students to use strategies for nonfiction research. It's a framework for building depth of knowledge. So, within the repeat of this process, you'll see how their depth of knowledge naturally increases, because now they're learning from their mistakes the first time, where they might have gotten quotes that don't really relate to each other. And now they're thinking about, oh, last time I got a bunch of quotes that I didn't use. This time when I read, as I read, I'm going to pause and make sure that they're connected. And this process can be used for a variety of purposes, age groups, abilities, and environments as a whole. So I think that a variation of this can be used in pretty much every classroom. So these are some concepts that I want to, again, kind of front load for you before we get into the lenses. And they're this, if the author has 100% control over his story, his or her story. If they have made a change in any key element, character, setting, plot, or style, it can alter the direction or the outcome of the story. It's not that, oh, this story is just the way it is and it's always been this way. No, the author makes those decisions, and he or she could have added any person, character, setting, culture, outcome of any element of the story. They chose those things to, the second bullet point, guide the reader's thoughts and perceptions of the story. They had an ulterior motive. They wanted the audience to believe or think something when they walked away from this story. The author also makes assumptions about what the readers are going to think regarding the story and characters and their development. The author knows people really well, and they know how to change people's minds and get them to think something different than they thought before they began reading the story. And one of the ways that I get a lot of engagement is just by talking about how authors manipulate and control their readers, and how if the reader thinks something about a character, if they hate the character or love the character, it's because the author wanted them to. That they made it in a way that's like relatable or causes anger. They did that. The author gets credit for that. And that really helps them to want to find out how the author's manipulating them and how the author wants them to think something and manipulate them. So it ends up being really interesting. And again, it can lead to really great conversations. And then when students are looking for creating that claim or identifying that thesis statement, there are two factors they're really looking for. Number one is how the author changes or shapes the narrative and the reader's worldview. So each of your students are different. They have a different worldview, different belief system. They Those two elements, the reading of the story and their perspective, unite for a unique claim. And so again, that's super empowering for the students to go, oh, I can say what I want about this. Now, within that, what they will likely, some of them will say, well, I'm going to prove that this author is the worst author in the world. And I'm like, well, That's actually a harder essay to write because you're going against all of the experts throughout a long history of people believing that they are good. So if you want to prove that they're that bad, that's a really hard argument to make. And so what I do is, why do you think that you don't like this story? And then that gets into well, I don't like this character. Okay, then that's your point. Then let's look at the characteristics of that character as opposed to saying the author is a bad writer. Um, so all of these end up being very interesting. And whenever you get the essays, you're not reading the same essay over and over again, but you're reading more about what the student feels is important, and that you can actually see the natural growth in their ability from struggling with this to starting to begin to get it instead of just regurgitating what you have said or what everyone has said in class. So, this is the assignment that I'm going to teach you how to do. These are the notes that I give them. As you can see, it's a very simple version. This is much different than the PDF that I'm giving you. The PDF I'm giving you is for higher end students who are self-motivated. There's a lot more complexity in the way that the questions and the prompts are given. So what I encourage you to do is see, this is the most simple form, and then you'll see the advanced form. And what you're going to do is you're going to play around with what's going to be right for your particular group of students. So as you can see, there's 5 columns. I would highly suggest for the first few times to not even address style. This is the problem. We focus so much on literary analysis and literary devices, but I'm going to ask you to focus on these other elements and bring in the style conversation later. So this is the main question that all of these lenses answer. And that is what could have been done, what the author could have done, but wasn't, and why. What could the author have done, but wasn't, and why? So when we really dig into he could have done anything. She didn't choose that. She chose this. Why is this a better choice than that? Or why does this lead to a different outcome than that? That is the question I ask regularly. So we're going to start with human behavior. So there's a few elements of human behavior that you have already probably taught, and we call that characterization. So these are the other words for it: characterizations or psychological lens. So the psychological lens is, how do humans behave in certain situations? When you put certain groups of people in certain situations, they behave in many of the same ways. As much as we want to say everyone's different or everyone acts differently, it depends. Yes, it does. But there can be ways to make judgments on what those options can be and what the possible outcome can be. If someone chooses a bad behavior or illegal behavior, it's highly likely that they have a likelihood of getting in big trouble for it. If they choose good behaviors, highly likely that they will have good results from that. But the idea of understanding why people choose the choices that they make and what motivates them and what the outcome is. So authors understand people very, very well. If they didn't understand people, we would read those stories and not feel like they're human. They would feel like there's something off about them. So he or she creates those characters with certain characteristics for that specific purpose in the story. If we take that character out or change their personality traits, then it changes the direction of the story. And so we really think about it really highlights the choices that the author made. And so that leads to those questions, which are, which characters or behaviors affect the plot or others character's behavior. And then if that character personality trait or behavior changed in any part of the story, how would the story as a whole change? The next one is morals and religion. So, other words for this might be philosophy, theme, life lessons, belief systems. This is also something you've probably already taught. Theme is something we teach a lot in English class. And so, but I'm going to call it morals or religion for the sake for them to grab onto it. So, again, we have an author who decides to share good and bad things that happen to characters and the result of that. What that does, it actually reveals their morality. So, sometimes we ask ourselves this question: do these consequences, these good or bad consequences, reveal the author's belief about life or the character's belief about life? So we can read something like Catcher in the Rye and say, well, J.D. Salinger is teaching a life lesson to the readers through the eyes of Holden. He's telling his own story through Holden's experience so that we understand the anguish and difficulty that he experienced as a child. And those are discussions that we can have based on these lenses if we'd like. What and then we ask ourselves, what do the characters think or say about the world or topics that indicate their beliefs or assumptions? Sometimes they say it outright. At the beginning of The Grapes of Wrath, the pastor, the minister, he says it right away, what he believes about religion, goodness, all of those things. So those are the places where we really grab onto those quotes and see where it takes us. The questions to ask ourselves when we're looking at this content through the moral or religious lens are: what are the lessons about the story or belief that the characters state that reveal the theme of the story? So, or state or experience. So, is it love, loss, humanity, justice? Again, religion, goodness, beauty, any of those philosophical topics. And what would change in the story if those beliefs or lessons were different or opposite? If there's a religious character, what if they were not religious? If it was a not religious character, what would happen if the character was religious or hopeful? Or any of these versions, we play around with this what if game in order to find the real purpose that the author made to have this outcome. So next one is culture or subculture. This ends up being the favorite. Initially, when they see this word culture, they're like, no way. But once we discuss this, they go, oh, this is so interesting because they all can relate to these elements. So another word that I use for this is sociology or groupthink. We know that people in groups or subgroups have a spoken or unspoken beliefs or rules that they follow to be welcomed into that group. It could be gender, age, religion, generation, interest groups, sports teams, schools, nationality, region, the region that you live in or the state, the East Coast versus West Coast versus the South versus the North. Versus, oh, you like football, I love basketball. Like all of these groups, even though they might be of the same, you know, ethnicity, they might have differences in the way they behave toward others based on their interests, based on smaller subculture or larger a culture that's a little bit more worldwide. And so what we ask ourselves is, hey, what cultures, groups, or subcultures are highlighted in the story and for what purpose? This is a good one to talk about through with with the Montagues and the Capulets. They have a difference in the way that they believe life should behave. But what's really weird is that how much similarity they have, but how the small differences split them. And these elements of culture, again, their race might be the same, but their belief systems are slightly different in a way that creates that division. And then, is the conflict a result of the differences between these groups or cultures? Because if it is, then that is a really good thing to focus on within the analysis, because then we're really getting into the core of how beliefs and how cultures can divide and unite. And then what if the cultures or subcultures were different? What if the oppressor and the oppressee were flipped? Would they still behave in the same way? If what if the ethnicities were different, or the story moved from New Orleans to the West Coast? Would the story progress in the same way? But based on the different cultures and the different ways that people see others and these topics? And would that change affect the plot, the conflict, or the outcome of the story? And lastly, this is the historical lens. They think, a lot of them will think, I want to do this one, and they realize it's a lot harder than you think. So, there are events within each of the stories or the author's life that influence the writing of the story. It might be intertwined in the story, or it could be alluded to, or it could be like 1984, where George Orwell was wrote the story. I'm pretty sure that's the author. Um, Wrote the story based on his fears and what he saw occurring in his in the political sphere during that time. So that really greatly influences a lot of authors' decisions. He could be influenced by his world or experience. The author may include current or previous events within the story. Readers may change their interpretation based on their experience. So this is one that I want to note, is that, us as the modern reader, we might not understand the choices and the actions of the previous stories and characters. But what we can do as teachers is encourage them to not look at the past through modern lenses, but look at the past as uh, evidence of growth and change, and how much more may need to still occur. And so the questions to ask ourselves is, how do these historical elements, beliefs, events affect the story and characters? And what would change if the story occurred in a different time period, different location, whatever? Um, so these are the four main lenses, and I'm going to just touch on the topic of style. As I mentioned, I really want to flip the conversation from focusing on literary devices to realize that all authors use their unique style to create a story that makes the reader believe something. When we realize that the literary devices are only used to control, manipulate, or influence the reader to believe something, then we can more effectively use and identify those techniques. The choices of words, why this word versus that word? Would this word been more manipulative than that? Is the way it was structured manipulative? Is it trying to do something? Is it used to influence the reader in some way? The content, the characters, are any characters like highly influential or impactful? The symbolism, is there a repetition of symbolism that is fearful or warning or even positive? And so that way, whenever we start looking at those lenses first, then these things should be highlighted within it, as opposed to the reverse. Because sometimes students start looking at diction and syntax and they're like, okay, yeah, they could have used different words, so what? Well, if they're looking at diction through the eyes of culture and the choices that a particular group is using as opposed to another group, then that may highlight the purpose around those particular words. So this is an opportunity. I'm not going to stay on here too long, because if you would like to try this, I'd ask you to pause the video, get out a sheet of paper, and identify two or three quotes that you feel align with the lens that you find the most interesting. Just pick one. Maybe you can focus on the human behavior element. Is anything in here revealing how people behave in certain situations, regardless of their ethnicity or their culture? Is this how any regular person would act, or is this revealing the elements of human nature of fight or flight, or even a Maslow's hierarchy of needs? And so then we ask ourselves, okay, is this revealing a moral quality? Is the author trying to teach us a moral lesson? Or is the author, I think in this case, wrestling with morality because he's pulled between two cultures and elements that don't align? Is it focused on culture? Is the differences between the European, the imperialistic, uh, 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 culture of the English and the police officer, um, is his culture and belief system that significantly different than the Burmese? And how do those cultural differences create conflict between each other? And then lastly, again, we know that this was written toward the end of colonialism, that imperialism. And so what we do is we look at this story through the historical lens and say, okay, well, obviously we're not going to have somebody shooting an elephant in Arizona. But would the same types of behaviors and same actions happen in the same types of way if this shooting an elephant event happened last week in Burma versus probably 80 years ago? And so this brings up really interesting conversations and thought processes. So I encourage students to pick any quote that they feel might relate to their lens, because we're going to throw away some of them. I don't tell that to the end. Um, but if they feel like it's useful, then go ahead and write it down. So what I have them do is do Cornell notes. As they read, I pause at every paragraph and I say, okay, pick two sentences, one or two sentences that you feel like relate to your lens. And all they do is write down the sentence, and they don't do anything after that. And then we read the next paragraph. Okay, which sentence really feels like relates to your lens, or it's just interesting? If you can't find one that relates to your lens, that you just find it interesting. So that's what I'm going to ask you to do is go ahead and read this first paragraph of Shooting an Elephant and decide on a lens and see if you can write down one or two sentences here that you think relate to that lens. All right, so I hope you did that. I'm going to just talk through the first three sentences to show you what students can do. So on the left side, of course, they're going to write down their quotes. And then on the right side, they're going to not just define the lens, but answer the two or three questions that are written in the notes. In the first line, in Molmen in Lower Burma, I was hated by large numbers of people. The only time in my life that I have been important enough for this to happen to me. As you can see, this can be looked at that through the historical lens of, this police officer. We haven't gotten there yet. Or, and again, Burma. I'm not super familiar about the country of Burma, but what I would not do is ask them to become experts on Burma. We can still make meaning of the content without knowing that much about Burma, unless it really matters to them. The moral lens ideally is the best lens to use with this because of this last part. The only time in my life that I've been important enough for people to hate me. So that reveals what he believes is true or right. And then also behavior lens. This could be it could be looked at as a behavior lens. I would say more than likely a moral lens. And then you ask yourself, why would the author choose to begin the story this way? What does it reveal about the author's or the narrator's beliefs? And what would have changed if he started this story in a different way so that we can highlight why he said it this way? Because again, one of the things we're seeing here is that he feels this narrator feels like, wow, I didn't realize like I didn't intend for all these people to hate me, but wow, now I'm important enough. All these people hate me. Um, I was subdivisional police officer of the town, and in an aimless, petty kind of way, anti-European feeling was bitter. This is also the culture, that culture between the police officer and mole men. This is an opportunity to talk a little bit about colonialism and the differences between the oppressor and the oppressee, the European or the British uh, colonizers versus the native people. I wouldn't get too far into that and just allow students to make those claims themselves, just to allow different interpretations. Because once we start over explaining what we believe, then they start lowering their analysis skills and they start depending on only what we say about it. And that it also stops people with different points of view from having any engagement. They just end up shutting down. Um, the moral lens and the historical lens can be useful here. You just have to give them a little bit of context. And then no one had the guts to raise a riot, but if a European woman went through the bazaars alone, somebody would probably spit betel juice over her dress. They always ask, what is Betelgeuse? I don't know. Do you want somebody to spit juice on your dress? Like, would you want that? Or would that be appropriate for somebody to spit Betelgeuse on your sister's dress? Probably not. So that's really the point here. So they can analyze this through the moral lens, cultural lens, or human behavioral lens. All right. So the next step, ask students to gather 4 quotes per page or 6 quotes per chapter. When finished reading, and I'm going to ask you to do this now. Um, After you read and do your quote analysis, is that you're going to see as you start answering those questions that possibly um, you're going to find some that aren't related, that aren't useful. And so, what you're going to do is narrow them down into groups of similar themes or similar concepts. If they're all talking about uh, the character or the human behavior, then start breaking down the actions that are happening or the behaviors with consequences and start to group them together. You can get rid of some of them if as you start going through the analysis and see that they're not that useful. So what I do is after we read Shooting an Elephant, they gathered 10 quotes and they only picked 4 of them to really break down and analyze and answer the questions. So I had to prompt them a little bit, especially at the beginning, to go, hey, you know, look at every sentence as if it's the only thing in the story that changed. Everything else was the same in order to have something to respond to because they'll feel like they're repeating the same words and way to analyze the content. So they should have a variety of quotes that are different than everybody else's. And then what we're looking for is a trend or a claim emerging from their quotes. What is it showing about human behavior? What is this story showing about the author's morals or morals that people should have? What is it showing about the culture or the differences in culture or the historical elements that are revealed in the story? And those are the questions we're asking. And the challenge is, and I actually mentioned this already, I'm going to not spend too much time on this. Just this question is how can I analyze the quotes differently when all the quotes are talking about the same thing? Think about if that quote is the only thing that changed. when they struggle, I encourage you to model your thinking. Show them how to analyze every sentence in the first paragraph. What do you think about it? What significance is that sentence to the story, the people, the culture, or any of the other lenses? You can give them sentence stems. I've done that before. Let them practice only on one lens at a time. If you feel like, you know, shooting an elephant is primarily about the moral or the cultural lens, just focus on one of those two primarily to teach them how to engage with the text. And then also, what I have done in the past is actually let them write an entire, all of their content in pairs. So that forces them to talk about it. Of course, we assume that's true. And we encourage them to talk about it, encourage them to engage and agree on what's going to be written. So I would love for you to think about how this strategy might be adapted to your population. I'd love for you to download the PDF I'm sending with you and see how you can balance the more simple version with the more challenging version for your particular population and see if any of these strategies work. Some of the things that I do with this is I really practice having them pull quotes, having them look at their quotes, think about their personality, think about what the author's doing, and build claims around that. And then using those claims to write down their explanations of their quotes. How do the quotes prove the thesis? The beauty of that is it really gives them no opportunity to add fluff. You know, here's the quote. Here's the thesis statement. How does the quote prove the thesis statement? That's your outline of anything that you write. I sometimes have them write one pagers. The one pager includes one sentence claim, a lead in quote, an explanation for three quotes, and a conclusion sentence. And that's it. If they can do that, then we have gotten further than possibly been writing in the past. The other way that you can do this for a simpler version is just have a poster project. The title of the story, their thesis statement or claim, and four quotes with explanation that are just on the piece of paper. And that is the framework for a short essay response. The other thing is you can have them build out an entire essay, 5-paragraph essay. This is the last suggestion, or the thing that I have done is have them read 3 stories, create 3 outlines, one for each story, turn one of them into a larger paper, and that's it. So it gives them repetition. It simplifies my grading and assigning process. I don't feel like I'm completely overwhelmed with paper on a day-to-day basis, but I do feel a little overwhelmed with the amount of essays I have to grade. But that is that to me that is a good compromise. All right, because I can see the growth that the students make, and they are having unique claims. They're learning critical thinking, and they're increasing their ability to write more formally and academically. All right, thank you so much for your time. I'd love to hear any feedback from you on these or the lesson that I presented to you. If you have any successes, I'd love to see those. I'd love to have if you have any questions or concerns about how you might apply these concepts to your particular audience, please let me know. I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. All right, have a great day.